Okay, Darren, we're here on a nice blustery winter day talking about what does it really take to control a weed? Well, you know, cold is going to control weeds just fine.
Well, freezing temperatures, sure, that will control annual weeds. Perennial weeds will survive it just fine because they've got that established root system. And that's something that you need to think about. There's really two different parts to the plant. There's the above ground portion and the below ground portion. We've got a lot of products that can burn off the above ground portion, but we've got very few products that do an effective job controlling that root system.
Okay, here's what I really wanted to get at today. When we talk about herbicides and weed control, it all starts with getting good coverage on the leaves. We want to get as much product as possible on the leaves. Then those leaves have to absorb that chemical. Then the weed has to move that chemical to the growing point or points. So grass plants, for example, just have one growing point, and broadleaf weeds, they have multiple growing points. Basically, at every stem that comes off the main stem, you're going to have a different growing point. So you've got to have a lot of weed killing power there in order to kill every single growing point. And even though grass, I said there is one growing point, it's a little different when we have perennial grasses like quackgrass, for example, that will have rhizomes below ground. You actually could have multiple growing points, but all the other growing points are going to be below ground. So it takes a lot of herbicide to get there. So the reason why we're talking about all this stuff today is we've had a lot of farmers who've had problems controlling weeds in the last few years. Some of that has had to do with resistance, but a lot of it, in my opinion, is just I don't think people have fully understood what it really takes to get good weed control.
All right, Brian, you already skipped over all kinds of things here. We're just jumping right to growing points and everything else. I want to go back to where you said, all right, you spray, it lands on leaves, and it goes into the plant. Well, first of all, the leaf has all kinds of defense systems to try and stop that herbicide from getting in. Now, when we're spraying herbicides, we're typically spraying something with water. So we're putting 10 gallons of water or 15 gallons of water, with a small amount of herbicide and spraying it out there. So we have a water-based solution landing on a leaf that's often got a very oily surface. So first of all, that oily surface is going to repel water and hold it off. Then you think about that leaf when we get into dry conditions versus when we're in humid and wet conditions. We're in humid, wet conditions, that leaf is open and it's ready to take in more moisture, and this is a good thing. But when it gets dry, that leaf closes up and it does not want to try and take in things because it doesn't want to let out any water either.
Okay, in addition to that though, the leaf will actually try to prevent moisture loss if conditions get really hot and really dry for a long period of time. And then what ends up happening is that leaf will build up a thick, waxy leaf surface called the leaf cuticle. And we don't want that leaf cuticle to be really thick because what happens is it's very hard to get herbicide to penetrate through and actually get into the leaf. So that's where we talk about all these different spray adjuvants, and we know that methylated seed oil and crop oil can burn through that wax much better than non-ionic surfactant. So in the middle of the wintertime, I can't tell you exactly if you should use methylated seed oil or crop oil or non-ionic surfactant when you're mixing different herbicides together or even spraying a single herbicide. It's going to depend on the conditions that you have right when you're spraying.
All right, well, leaves have a couple other defense mechanisms too. Like take a velvet leaf, for example. On velvet leaf, it has a really dense mat of small little hairs. And when you see a real close-up of spraying onto a leaf, those little hairs will actually hold those droplets up, and many times they'll just dry up or evaporate or whatever in the summer, and they won't ever get down onto that leaf to soak in. So it's got a great defense mechanism, and you have to add adjuvants like Brian was saying to try and get past that.
One question that Darren and I get quite commonly is, what's the best time of day to spray? And I will always say, look, it doesn't matter when you spray exactly, as long as you can take wind and moisture out of the equation, and temperature too. So you got wind, temperature, and moisture. If those three things were constant, I don't really care that much when you spray. But we do have issues of moisture, for example, when it gets to be real early in the morning or late in the evening, there's a lot of dew. And obviously you are gonna have water on those leaves. You're gonna try to stick herbicide on there, and a lot of the herbicide is just gonna run off. So that really doesn't do you a whole lot of good. Temperature is another thing we talk about quite a bit. Like with Roundup, for example, we'll always tell people, look, don't even think about spraying Roundup if you've had freezing temperatures within a couple days before or even after you spray. And we would really prefer that you up the rate by 50% if your nighttime temps are going to be below 50 degrees. The reason why is, you talk about when we were able to get that herbicide into the plant a little earlier and we want to move it to the growing point, it moves a lot slower to the growing point when the conditions are cooler. Okay, when it moves slower, there's less herbicide that actually ends up reaching the growing point, and obviously that's not a good thing. if you've got tough to control weeds.
Well, there's certainly a lot of things that go into controlling weeds effectively. So if you're looking at a weed problem out on your farm, there's several factors you need to consider. Talk with a good agronomist if you need some help to pick the right product and do the correct application.
Well, speaking of weed control, you're really going to need to get this one under control on your farm. Can you identify this week's weed?